What do you think about this statement? Emotions are not the universal truths we've been all led to believe. I know this may sound like it is challenging or conventional beliefs and ideas about emotions that we all understand it to be. But this video is actually not to challenge your beliefs about emotions, but to actually invite you to think about emotions differently and how to regulate our emotions and master emotional regulation through a neurological perspective. Where I'm coming from is actually because I just finished an eye-opening, fascinating book that has completely changed my perspective on the science of emotions and everything that I understood about it, including what most of the public, I believe, understands it as. And I'm referring to the book called How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain. It's right here. And it is by one of the most venerated scientists in modern science, who is among the top 0.1% cited scientists in the entire world on her revolutionary research in psychology and neuroscience. She is the phenomenal Lisa Feldman Barrett. She has a viral TED Talk on this as well too. If you want to actually explore that, I will link to that in the description below. I highly recommend that. And of course, the book. She has a lot of interesting things to say about how we humans make emotions from a neurological perspective. Again, any new idea that we all discover, I think it's the best way to look at them is to really just expand our own worldview and perspective on things to make better choices in our lives, as well as how it can impact others around us and maybe even on a bigger scale. That's how I like to look at and approach new information that I'm learning, to really just expand my thinking, understanding, and perspective on the world. Because as I widen my perspective on the world and my being in relation to the world, I believe we can all empower ourselves to better understand and interpret the experiences we are having. And this knowledge and insights that I gained in Lisa Feldman Barrett's book really did just that. And I hope this episode is to invite you on that journey to also widen your perspective on the science of emotions, so that it may also empower you as well in understanding yourself better by understanding how our brain works in relation to emotions. So to properly set the stage for this episode, I want to reflect back on some prevailing understanding of emotions that we all have within our own society and culture. And it's a narrative really echoed frequently across psychology, social development, and just our everyday discourse. And you'll recognize them if you scroll through Instagram or any of the social platforms or just the mass media and literature. They include that our emotions happen to you, but actually emotions, no, from a neurological perspective, we construct them. And I'll expand on that a little bit more. And then there's this idea that we get emotionally triggered or we have an emotional reaction. And the statement has become common in our zeitgeist, and the perception that understanding our emotions that way are really passive reactions triggered by some external stimuli or an event or a partner or any situation. And as I stated earlier, our brain actually constructs them from three main inputs. This is really fascinating. It's based on our physiological feelings, our cultural context, and then our past experiences. And then when you understand how our brain works in relation to emotions, you may even start to challenge or just think differently on how to form better descriptions of what is actually happening, and start to challenge these language as it infers passivity to our experience of emotion. But our brain is actually predicting, as it always does, to just make sense of these inputs. And that is the number one job of our brain. It's actually to keep us alive and well. We seem to forget that. Without the ability to be alive and physiologically healthy and well, we can't even function, we can't even have the ability to be mindful. So we understand that emotions can't be triggered. We have a more active role in interpreting our emotional experiences. And I really love how Lisa Feldman Barrett always says we are the architect of our own experiences. And then there's this idea that emotions are hardwired in us. There's these specific, our brain regions that light up specifically when we are feeling an emotion. And I believe this too, of course, up until I read Lisa Feldman's book, because it is founded on this classical view of emotions, that they are hardwired in us, and we have certain emotional centers in our brain that are responsible for generating and processing certain emotions, i.e., we've all heard amygdala is responsible for processing fear. But you know what? Lisa Feldman Barrett and her team found that our brain actually constructs emotions. They don't fire, or they are imprinted in certain areas of our brain. And this is her theory of constructed emotions, which in one simple sentence just states that our brain is literally just constructing emotions based on how we interpret combination of, again, the sensory input, the physiological feelings we are feeling, our past experiences, and the cultural context of that experience. And this internal monitoring of our brain allows our brain to actually construct the emotional experiences based on just really interpreting these physiological signals rather than them being reactive to some external stimuli. Because our brain is always in a predicting mode to keep us alive and well, predicting of what is about to happen. So to put it simply, the emotions of sadness, happiness, etc. are just stories our brain makes up based on what is happening around us and what we have experienced before. And they're not automatic reactions. They are interpretations that our brain creates, kind of like making up a story to explain how we're feeling. And yes, though, we do feel. It does not invalidate that we don't feel. But from a neurological perspective, we actually just feel only two things, either pleasant or unpleasant, which is called valence. And then, which are those bodily sensations, which we all feel, are actually called affect. And while emotions, as explained earlier, is more complex and is constructed in our head, and then there's this prevailing thought that we feel before we think. Not necessarily, because emotions are not these pre-existing states that automatically occur before we think. Again, our brain's number one job is to keep us alive. And how does it do this? By balancing what Lisa Feldman Barrett calls body budget, which includes such physiological mechanisms like metabolism, breathing, our heart rate, our blood flow, etc., which is all functioning inside of us. And it does this by always operating as a prediction model based on the sensory input we are gathering and getting all the time, every day. And then it's really powerful. And to me, that just makes me believe I have more control and can be more empowered with how I perceive and interpret the world and my being in the world. So by understanding emotions from a neuroscience perspective, now I'd love to dive into how we can practically use this transformative knowledge to empower ourselves. Because at the end of the day, I truly believe that's the best use of new knowledge and information. So some people have affirmations. For me, I like to ask empowering questions. Every time I feel I'm in some momentary paralysis or ruminating, oh my God, comment below if you're if you're like me, always ruminating, over analyzing an unpleasant situation and you feel like you're just stuck worrying about some uncertainty or about something. Are my thoughts empowering me or disempowering me? So then how can I empower myself with this newfound knowledge and information in this context, the science of emotions, to master my emotions, aka emotional regulations, from a neurological perspective? This may not resonate with all of you, but if it does for you, like it did for me, it has become really transformative. Number one way Lisa Feldman Barrett recommends is, and I'll share some of my additional thoughts, but she says, keep your body budget in shape. So I learned this concept and term first from Lisa Feldman Barrett by reading her book, and I really love it. I'm going to be using it all the time. And she links to it regularly, speaking about our brain, because she says, as we learn, as I shared with you, that our brain's number one job is just to keep us alive and well. And it does so fundamentally by managing and regulating our body's physiological systems. Again, our respiratory system, our circulatory system, our metabolism, our immune system, etc. And because our brain is constantly monitoring our body's internal state through this concept called interoception, which again just involves sensing the signals in our body within our body, such as, again, the heartbeat, breath, hunger, to really just predict how to interpret what is happening in our body, the experience, to maintain our overall health. And this process is the origin, she says, of our affective feelings that we all experience. Does this make sense? If we are not physiologically well, such as being sleep deprived, not eating right, have a lot of external stresses, we cannot just think our way to feel better, right? We just can't. Let me actually give you a personal example. So I recently returned from a 6-day trip in Marrakesh, Morocco. Oh my God, if you've never been to Morocco, the city is bursting with vibrant colors, exotic scents, and it's bustling cacophony of sounds, not to mention the extreme heat, which was a bit much for me. But needless to say, my senses were heightened and overstimulated for myself. And when I returned to Lisbon, which is where I reside, my body budget, to use Lisa Feldman Barrett's terminology, was severely taxed. I felt it. And I saw it on my body and my face, like I had bags under my eyes. But not only physically, but I found myself interpreting and kind of reacting to situations unfavorably and uncharacteristically than if my body budget was not taxed. But the situation was affecting my mood, affect, and creating such emotional feelings that I was sad, upset, worried, when first and foremost, my body budget was severely taxed, which fundamentally influenced my emotional state. And so, 2, Lisa Feldman Barrett recommends modify your physical comfort. So that can be by massage, exercise, or even just a human or animal touch. So did you know that touch, be it from a human or animal, like your pet? Anyone have a pet? I have the most adorable, loving puppy, but actually enhances our interoception. So touch actually provides a sensory input that helps us increase our awareness of our body's internal state. That is the process of interoception. So by promoting interoceptive awareness, our touch can actually support our brain's ability to monitor and regulate our physiological processes, and really just promoting overall health and well-being. Is that fascinating? I think so. 3, adjust your physical surroundings. So this could be being in serene nature, which can be really balancing for our body budget. I definitely experienced it in my recent example where I was in an environment with lots of noise and crowd. And these previous recommendations were attending to the body budget. Now I want to share one of the other recommendations from her, which is fascinating. And I never expected this suggestion would lead to mastering our emotions and regulating emotions. But let me describe it. She says, learn new words to be more emotionally intelligent. See, Lisa Feldman Barrett says emotionally intelligent. Being emotionally intelligent is not the classical view where we understand it to be being able to detect emotions in people accurately or even experiencing certain emotions the right way. That is not the definition of being emotionally intelligent. She says emotional intelligence is actually about getting our brain to construct the most useful instance of the most useful emotion concept in any given situation. So if we learn new words to build a more expansive knowledge and concepts or knowledge of emotional concepts, she argues that if you can distinguish finer, more precise meaning within more general concepts, for example, awesome, which can be interpreted as happy, content, thrill. There's so many different ways of looking at that. Our brain would have more options for predicting, categorizing, perceiving, and understanding emotions, providing this more expansive tools, more flexibility for functional responses. This means she suggests having emotional granularity because words, she says, seeds are concepts, and our concepts drive our brain's ability to predict. And predictions regulate our body budget, and our body budget determines how we feel. So the more we expand our vernacular, in this case, related to emotions, we are able to construct more concepts for our brain to predict more precisely of how we feel. So for example, she cites this in her book. There's a Korean word called jung. And I remember my mom describing this. It's a deep sense of connectedness, affinity, or an attachment to someone. And I remember as a Korean, my mom speaking about this feeling and how she felt, in her view, that Korean people develop and feel jung with someone, which may make it harder to walk away from a relationship, be it romantic or a friendship. And I'm not sure how Koreans today, in today's society, would agree with her sentiment, but that's beside the point. She even invites us to create emotion concepts and share and teach them to our own circle of influence, fear of influence, because she says once we teach them to our family and friends, they are just as real as any other emotion concept. And it brings the same benefit to our body budget. But now I understand why my mom had thought that if that word jung doesn't exist outside of the Korean culture, and people don't, let's say if you're an American, of course, how could you feel it? How could you understand it if that concept of emotion doesn't even exist in your vernacular, in your culture? You haven't constructed it. So that was really fascinating, and it was really, really interesting that Lisa Feldman Barrett cited it in her book, and then it tied to my experience in earlier childhood when my mom brought that up. And I remember back then thinking, that's a really interesting and strange belief that my mom had. But now it all ties together. It makes sense to me that my younger self certainly could not tie it all together. So I'm keen to start this practice to see how we can get more emotionally granular. The next time I'm having and describing an emotional experience, and see how this rewires my brain. And I'm actually putting this into practice and being very precise with my word. So what do you think about what I shared with you today about this paradigm shift in understanding the science of emotion? If it even piqued your curiosity a tiny bit, I think it's a good sign. that you are welcoming new ways to challenge conventional wisdom. Or maybe if I extract that word challenge and just say invite you to look at new perspectives, we may be able to actually be more accurate in describing how we are experiencing, and as we are evolving and constructing our social reality. So I want to end this episode with a bold statement that Lisa Feldman Barrett ended with in her book. Quote, like most paradigm shifts in science, this one has a potential to transform our health, laws, and who we are. So P.S. Younger self. Our emotions do not happen to us. We construct them based on our sensory input, our cultural influences, and our past experiences. So remember, you have the power to shape the experiences that empower you. You are the architect of your emotional landscape. So I hope this episode has been helpful and insightful or at least interesting in some way to expand your knowledge and perspective of the science of emotion. If it has, please do me a favor, like or comment below, or just share it with one other person that may pique their curiosity. Because as I mentioned before, my goal, my hope with PS Younger Self platform is, as I share new information and knowledge, is to help us expand our knowledge and perspective to better empower ourselves and others and how we interpret our experiences in the world. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.